Hey guys, this is the MTG noob here, and I'm here with
Coach JBK.
And today we're going to be talking about mulliganing and the art of it, and this is another For the Noobs installment, and it was requested in the comments, so we thought we'd hook up whoever needs a little bit of help with mulliganing.
There are several basic reasons for mulliganing. First of all, you can have too little land to do anything. Number two, you can have too much land. Number three, you can have a hand that really doesn't do anything, and we're going to talk about a scenario with that. And then number four, you can have a hand that does too little against your opponent. For example, if you're playing an opponent who has a really fast deck and you lose the first game or you win, either way, and you go to the sideboard and then you get your hand for game 2 or game 3, you know what their deck does, and the hand that you've got may just not do anything to prevent them from putting you in a bad situation before you get something on the board.
Okay, so let's talk about our first scenario, which is too little land. If you look at this hand, it actually has no land. So too little, no land, not enough land, whatever you want to call it, you're not going to be able to cast anything. This is a very, very easy level 1 basic mulligan where you're always going to have to ship back this 7 for a 6. Okay, in our second scenario, we have too much land. Whenever you have too much land, you really have to be worried about drawing even more land on your draw steps, and it may seem tempting to keep a hand with so much land because you think, oh, I'll be able to cast all my spells when I draw them. But when you really boil down the numbers, it's likely that you might end up drawing a land or 2 or 3 in your first few draw steps, and you may draw a spell that costs way too much or doesn't do anything. So too much land is not really a good thing in this case.
Yeah, and it seems like always when I have too much land going on that I always seem to draw 2 or 3 straight lands after keeping a hand like this.
Okay, in our third scenario, we have a hand that does nothing. Now, this hand has a lot of very powerful cards in it, and it would be great to keep it since we do have 3 lands, but our land does nothing. It does not produce red mana, and all of our cards need red mana. So this hand, I would say, is borderline keepable, but if you never hit that red source, you do absolutely nothing, and most likely you'll just lose. So you got to try to stay away from hands that do nothing. I would think that's much harder to do. It's a harder decision to make than when you have all lands or no lands. Kind of mulliganing takes a little bit more practice, and you have to recognize what hands do what against what decks and what opponents, and if you can really get away with keeping a hand. Because let's say you hit a red source on turn 5, you're dead by then. There's not much you could do. In our fourth scenario, we have a hand that does too little against an opponent. Now, in this hand, you have 2 5-drops, a 7-drop, and a removal spell. You don't have black mana, so it's kind of like, ugh, it's a little bit loose right away. And if your opponent comes out of the gate with a blazing fast start, if they're an aggro deck, you know, they go 1-drop, 2-drop, pump spell, removal spell, 3-drop, they'll kill you before you can ever do anything. It's really important to know the kind of hands you're keeping and against what decks you're keeping them. Even if you were playing against a control deck, this hand wouldn't do enough. It's just not a good hand. You can't keep hands that are borderline, and this type of mulliganing takes practice, and it's very, very disciplined if you can get rid of hands like this to try to get a hand that combats an aggro deck, or try to get a more aggressive hand that would combat a control deck better. Okay, in our fifth scenario, we have the really loose keep hand, which this hand is quote-unquote keepable, but when you examine it closely, it doesn't do enough. Our 1-drop, which we can cast, we can't really cast. Our 5-drop is so far away from casting. Our 2-drop requires white and blue mana, and we don't have any white mana. So you really only have lands and a street spasm currently. So when you look at this under a microscope, you really have a 4-card hand that you can play, and you really need a white source to do something. Then you need a creature to do something else. Then you need 2 more lands to do your 5-drop. So this would be considered a loose keep. A loose keep is any hand that you don't feel great about keeping it, that won't really turn into anything and defend against the strategy you are playing against.
Right, and you're not necessarily going to want to use that dramatic rescue on turn 2 either. You'd be forced into using maybe street spasm to remove something small if you just draw big creatures or something as well.
Okay, now let's get away from the negative Nellies of mulliganing and talk a little bit more about a strong keep. A strong keep is a hand that gives you a lot of game, gives you some versatility. You can really play your style, and your hand leads you to a successful strategy and does exactly what you want to do with your deck. If we look at this hand a little bit closer, we have a 1-drop, we have a really strong 2-drop, we have a 3-drop key rune that fixes our mana, and we have a 4-drop beat stick. We can play all of our lands, we could play all of the cards in our hand. This is probably the most optimal hand we can ask for outside of maybe one of our forests being a mountain, but it does what it's supposed to do, and I would feel very confident and strong about keeping this hand. Okay, so for our 7th scenario, we wanted to hear your thoughts on things, and we wanted to more or less see what you would do in certain circumstances. So we have a hand here. It's a forest, a swamp, a Golgari Guildgate as your mana base. Then you have a Rakdos Key Rune on 3, a Gorehouse Chainwalker, which you can't currently cast, a Augur Spree, which you can't currently cast, and a
Long legs, yeah.
Long legs. Now you can cast these things off of your key rune, but you would want to be casting a Chainwalker on 2 ideally. So let us know what you would do in this situation. Okay, and here's another one with a mountain, a island, and an Azorius Guildgate, a Street Spasm, a Tower Drake, and Armory Guard, and a Goblin Electromancer. So let us know your thoughts on this keep. Would you think this would be loose, strong? What would you feel keeping this hand? So, Coach, that was pretty much a beginner's guide to mulliganing. We hoped that you benefit from this. One thing that we wanted to be a little bit more specific on that we know a lot of new players and veteran players alike do is when they mulligan a 7-card hand and they get a 6-card hand and it doesn't look so good, it seems a little loose, people tend to get aggravated or go on tilt and just automatically keep that hand because, well, you know what, I don't want to mulligan to 5, or, you know, well, I shouldn't have mulliganed in the first place. You have to understand that you have to play with the cards you're given. So if your 7-card hand is terrible, you ship it back. If your 6-card hand is terrible, you're going to have to ship it back. You can't win if you don't give yourself the best opportunity to win. And that is why mulliganing exists in the first place. I'm not saying mulligan to oblivion, but keep in mind when you're mulliganing in the future all of these strong versus loose keeps and these pretty much auto mulligans versus keeps, and I feel that you will be doing a much better job in your actual matches because you've made smarter decisions to start the game off.
So we're looking forward to seeing what you've got for Scenario 7 and Scenario 8 in the comments. You can make the comments on the website or in the YouTube comment section. But check those out. Get back to us. Let us know what you think.
Yeah, and if you have any other mulliganing tips, remember these videos are for newer players, so your feedback is always helpful for us and for them. Thanks for watching. Please check out themtgnoob.com.